Baird's labored breaths reverberated across the narrow confines of the cave. The sound mingled with the rhythmic dripping of water from the jagged ceiling, each droplet echoing in Myra's ears like a countdown. Despite the faint light filtering through the cave's mouth, it was impossible to ignore the darkness gathering on the edges of her vision, the peril pressing upon them from every side. The rogues were out there, and they wouldn't stop hunting. Myra knelt beside Baird, her trembling hands hovering over the bloody gash on his shoulder. "Please, just stay still for a moment," she whispered, her voice quavering as she reached to tear a piece of her already tattered shirt. She wanted to bind his wound, but she worried it would only do so much good. He was a werewolf, sure, but this injury didn't look trivial. It was a deep slash that just wouldn't stop bleeding. His expression was tense, but he still mustered the faintest smile. "It'll heal faster than you think," he murmured, though his gritted teeth betrayed the pain he felt. The coppery scent of his blood filled the cold air, making Myra's stomach twist with worry. He tried to shift his position, pressing his back against the damp cave wall. "I'm more concerned about the rogues catching us off guard." She forced herself to look around, scanning the darkness. The cave was small, hardly more than a pocket carved into the rock. Their footprints outside on the wet ground would be a dead giveaway if the rogues came close. If they stayed here, pinned down by Baird's injuries and her own helplessness, they might as well be sitting ducks. Her gaze flicked back to Baird. He was by far the most experienced between them, ex-military of the Pack Alliance if she remembered his story right, someone who'd long fought to protect the borders from intruders. Yet here he was, battered and barely standing. She clamped down on the wave of panic rising in her chest and tried to focus on the immediate problem: how to get out of this forest alive. As if reading her mind, Baird exhaled slowly. "Myra," he started, his voice low but steady, "we need to come up with a plan. We can't just stay here." She nodded, grateful he was still able to think clearly, but dread coiled in her stomach. "What do you suggest?" "We separate," Baird said simply, but the finality of that word hit her like a blow. "They're after me. If I lead them away, you might stand a chance to escape." Her eyes widened. "No. There's no way I'm leaving you here by yourself." She moved closer to him, wanting desperately to pull him to his feet, to do something that made sense. "You're hurt, Baird. You need help. You can't take on a whole band of rogues alone." Baird raised a hand, silencing her. The flicker of candlelight, if only they had a candle, she thought ironically, might have shown the resoluteness in his gaze more clearly, but even in the dimness she could see his determination. "Myra, I've fought in worse conditions. I've been outnumbered before. I'll manage," he assured her. "Right now, my biggest concern is your safety. You can't protect yourself against a group of werewolves." Her chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Fear, guilt, gratitude. "That doesn't mean you are an ordinary human," he reminded her. "No matter how brave you are, you can't shift. You don't have the speed or strength they do. If you get caught, there's not much you can do to fight back." Myra stared down at his wound again, her heart pounding. She knew that everything he said was true. "But you're injured," she repeated, her voice coming out in a plea. "How can you possibly draw them away?" His lips curved in a wry, reassuring smile. "I've still got 4 functioning limbs. That's enough." He closed his eyes for a moment, inhaling a short breath through his nose. "Listen, it's only a matter of time before they find this cave. We've left tracks, blood, footprints. When they close in, they'll trap us both. I can lead them off and give you a head start." Myra felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. "I don't like this," she managed. "Neither do I," Baird admitted. "But it's our best bet." He jerked his chin toward the soft soil near the cave's entrance, where dust and rock crumbled beneath their feet. "Let me show you the route you should take." He shifted his weight, moving with obvious difficulty, and began to sketch a makeshift map on the ground using a small broken stick. The lines were rough and uneven, but she could still make out the shape of a winding river and 2 paths that diverged at a fork in the road. "The stream that carried you here," Baird said, glancing up to ensure Myra was paying attention. "You found me downstream. If you go back upstream, against the current, you'll eventually reach a fork in the path. This fork is crucial. She nodded, trying to commit every stroke of the makeshift map to memory. All right, you need to turn right. That route should take you back to Pack Alliance territory. He stabbed the stick at the route with a sense of urgency. If you go left, he warned, his expression tightening, you'll stray into Storm Pack territory. Mira swallowed, recalling all the half-whispered rumors she'd heard about that place. The Storm Pack had a fearsome reputation. They were extremely territorial, suspicious of outsiders, even from other recognized packs. A trespassing rogue, or at least someone they assumed was a rogue, could face execution. Her heart pounded harder at the thought. Promise me you won't mix them up, Baird said firmly, his gaze intense. You have to keep running along the right path. Return to the Pack Alliance. Once you're safe, you can find help. Do you understand? She nodded, tears threatening to spill. I understand. Baird released a measured breath, relief momentarily flickering across his features. Good. He paused, straightening up. The searing pain of his wound was evident in the grimace that twisted his lips, but he fought it down. Then it settled. You wait here until you hear me draw the rogues away. Once their howls fade, run. Don't look back. Myra's hands clenched into fists. Wait, Baird, you're sure about this? Her voice wavered, trailing off in the stillness of the cave. He nodded, though it looked like every muscle in his body protested the movement. It's the only way. They both fell silent for a moment, the gravity of the plan settling around them like a heavy shroud. Then Baird began to unbutton his shirt, preparing to shift. Mira quickly turned her gaze aside, feeling heat rise to her face as his torso came into view, battered and bruised with more injuries than she'd initially realized. He inhaled a trembling breath, fighting against the pain that threatened to cripple him. She heard the crack and pop of bones as Baird began the transformation. It was not a seamless shift. The gash on his shoulder slowed the process, forcing him to grit his teeth to stifle a pained growl. Even so, bit by bit, the man's form twisted, changing until an enormous wolf stood before Mira, silver fur mottled with streaks of blood. His lupin gaze flicked over her, silent but full of meaning. She knew he was telling her, in the only way he could now, to trust him, to run, to be safe. Outside, an eerie hush blanketed the forest. Then, in the distance, a single rogue's howl cut through the air. It was answered by several more. Their enemies were close and searching. No time left. Baird's ears flattened against his skull, and his lips curled back from his fangs in a silent snarl. Myra's breath caught in her throat, her legs feeling weak. Baird, she whispered. Be careful. The silver wolf snapped his head forward, sprinting out of the cave, leaving behind a crimson smear on the floor where his wounded shoulder had rested. Outside, the forest canopy was dense, the moonlight barely managing to filter through. She heard him crash through the underbrush, snarling to garner the rogue's attention. Soon enough, the snarls and howls of their pursuers filled the air. His plan was working. Mira staggered to the mouth of the cave, pressing herself tight against the cold stone, listening. She couldn't see him in the gloom, but she could track the progress of the chase by sound alone. Rapid footfalls, distant roars of frustration, the rustle of branches violently disturbed. The rogues must have heard and seen him. She prayed they all gave chase. If even one lingered, minutes bled into moments. Her heart hammered. She told herself she must be brave. They had no second chances. This was it. At last, the cacophony of wolves' snarls subsided. She realized the sound had drifted deeper into the forest, away from the cave. She closed her eyes and inhaled a trembling breath. Baird was leading them away, exactly as he'd said. Now, this was the moment. Clutching at her side, Mira dashed out, careful not to slip on the moist, mossy rocks at the entrance. All around her, the forest night buzzed with hidden creatures. The wind rustled the treetops, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. She forced herself not to think of Baird's ragged breathing, not to imagine the rogue's fangs snapping at his heels. He had told her to run. She would do as he asked. She found the river with little trouble. It was the same waterway that had carried her half-conscious body into this forsaken place earlier. In the darkness, its steady flow shone faintly under the moon's pale glow. The current rushed faster than she remembered, or perhaps her nerves made everything seem amplified. Still, she clung to Baird's instructions, turning upstream. Each step along the riverbank was precarious. Rocks jutted up unpredictably. Mud threatened to suck at her shoes. Thorny bushes snagged at her clothes, and more than once, she nearly lost her balance. But she pressed on, guided more by desperation than any real sense of direction. The recollection of Baird's makeshift map was burned into her mind. Upstream until she reached the fork. The forest around her was eerily quiet now, aside from the rush of the river. Perhaps the rogues had followed Baird into deeper territory. That thought brought relief and dread. If they were gone, it meant Mira might escape. But it also meant Baird was on his own, wounded, possibly fighting for his life. "Keep going," she whispered, forcing herself to push her legs faster. She hopped from rock to rock, heart thumping in her ears. Each time she moved, she half expected a savage snarl to erupt from the trees, signifying she'd been spotted. But the forest remained indifferent, providing no sign of friend or foe. After what felt like an hour, though it might have been mere minutes, she spotted something in the gloom, a branching path that cut away from the river. The faint starlight revealed two distinct tracks. One curved right, further inland, presumably toward Pack Alliance territory. The other veered left, disappearing among gnarled trees and thicker undergrowth. Mira stumbled to a stop at the fork, her chest heaving. She rested a hand against her thigh as she struggled to catch her breath. This was it, the very spot Baird had described. She could almost see the rough lines in the dirt he'd drawn. Turning right meant safety, returning to the Alliance, finding medical care, maybe even rounding up a search party to save Baird if time allowed. Left, however, meant crossing into Storm Pack lands, a place where anyone who lacked official permission to enter was labeled a rogue. A place rumored to be harsh and unyielding to outsiders. Mira closed her eyes, letting the rushing water fill her ears, wishing she could shut out her own racing thoughts. All the logic in the world urged her to turn right. That was how she could ensure her own survival. That was how she could get help. If she died in the Storm Pack's domain, what use would she be to anyone? But her mind conjured an image of Baird, silver fur streaked with blood, fighting for breath as he tried to outrun or outfight a group of rogues. She could still feel his strength, his reassuring presence, the grit in his voice as he told her everything would be fine. He had risked his life to give her this chance to escape. He never once hesitated to shield her with his body, though she was just an ordinary human with no claim to these woods. Her lips parted as she drew in a shaky breath. Could she turn her back on him? Could she really choose to run home while he might be lying somewhere in the dark, wounded and outnumbered? Even if she did get back to the Pack Alliance, how long would it be before she could bring help? Hours? Days? By that time, what if? She shuddered, unable to finish the thought. Tears prickled her eyes again, and in that moment of indecision, 1,000 doubts flooded her mind. What if Baird was already too far gone? What if the rogues had torn him apart the second he left the cave? What if he survived this night only to collapse from blood loss? The possibilities whirled. Time stretched like an endless rope, and her heart seemed to slow under the enormity of the choice before her. She felt rooted to the spot, yet the drumming of her pulse reminded her every second counted. Mira fixed her gaze on the right path, a route that could lead her back to everything safe and familiar. She tried to picture arriving at the Pack Alliance gates, battered and breathless, explaining to the guards that a friend was still out there, desperately in need of rescue. She had no idea how quickly anyone would mobilize to save a single, injured werewolf. Bureaucracy, caution, the presence of a rogue threat in the forest. So many things might delay a swift response. And if Storm Pack territory lay in the other direction, there was always a possibility that Baird or the rogues could end up crossing that boundary. Once that happened, events would spiral further out of control. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. Could she really live with herself if she just walked away? Her vision blurred as she dropped to her knees in the mud beside the fork, pressing a hand to her mouth. "I'm sorry, Baird," she whispered, tears pooling. "I can't let you die out here." And with that, she looked to the left path. She knew exactly what it meant. She remembered Baird's cautionary words, that Stormpack would never hesitate to execute a trespassing rogue. In their eyes, an unrecognized werewolf or any human wandering in their lands without clearance was a potential threat. But Baird was an acknowledged fighter from the Alliance, once in active service. Would that matter to them if they found him battered and half-conscious? Or if they found her? She doubted it. Yet her decision was already made. No matter how much she wanted to go home, to cling to the thin promise of safety, a part of her simply couldn't leave Baird behind to face all of this alone. The fleeting silence of the forest pressed in again, as though the trees themselves waited for her final choice. She inhaled a shaky breath and forced herself to her feet. Her limbs trembled from exhaustion, but she summoned what little strength she had left. Mira glanced one last time at the right path. She let the notion of security dance across her consciousness, and then she let it go. In a single decisive movement, she turned left, plunging into the darkness of storm-packed territory. There was no telling what lay ahead, but she would do whatever it took to save him.